Hey everyone, I hope you're having a great day. Welcome to Cube Reviews episode 23. This is your host, Ian Braverman. Today I am joined by Andy Mangold of Lucky Paper Radio. How are you doing today?
I feel like with the state of the world, it's a loaded question. I'm as good as can be expected, so we'll go with that.
I totally get it. Every day you gotta cheer yourself up when you hear the news. I totally understand.
I was just at a birthday party, and everyone that came in the door was like, "Oh, how are you?" to like everybody else, and I watched like 7 times people just kind of like short circuit, like, I'm not good," and it's like we just need a different way to greet each other in these sorts of times that doesn't saddle people with having to acknowledge the growing cloud of nonsense surrounding us.
Yeah, I think we just gotta stop asking how we're all doing and just get right into it.
I like to start with like, what are you excited about right now? That's like one of my favorite questions to ask at like a party or whatever. Just find out what people are excited about.
Yeah, definitely. And you're one of the guests that I've been very excited to have on for a while since I started this show. I've been listening to Lucky Paper Radio for years at this point. At CubeCon, the first couple CubeCons, I was super excited to meet you and play some Cube with you. And then I had the chance to meet you in Baltimore, go to your place when I was at SEGCon Baltimore, have some of your food you made on the grill. It was very good. Get smacked down and the Cascade Cube. Yeah, so how about before we just jump into all that, tell me a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I am a web developer. I live in Baltimore. One of my main hobbies is podcasting. You mentioned Lucky Paper Radio. I've been making podcasts actually for many years. Lucky Paper Radio is like the fourth or fifth podcast that I have had some part in making. So that's a hobby of mine for sure. I like to cook, hang out with my dog. I like to stop and pet every dog I pass on the sidewalk. I don't know what kind of how broad we want to go here with who I am.
Tell me something that nobody knows
Something that nobody knows?
on that you said on the show.
Something that nobody knows. Well, there's definitely people that know this, but I definitely haven't talked about it on the show, and it's a weird story. I spent 5 weeks in college living in a treehouse in northern Idaho, studying bookbinding from like one of the world's greatest living bookbinders, who also happens to be a return to the earth like hippie who just lives on like a completely self-sufficient homestead in northern Idaho.
Wow, that sounds amazing. And you heard it here, folks. The scoop here on Cube Reviews. And how did you get involved in that?
It's such a long story. So I actually minored in bookbinding in college, which is the thing you can do at art school. I majored in graphic design, minored in bookbinding, and there is a whole book arts scene that if you are not into book arts, you probably wouldn't know about. And it's just artists that make art with books in some way. And that's everything from like conceptual artists that are like, oh, I laser cut this, copy of some famous book into the shape of a gun, and that says something about something, to people that are just like kind of craftsmen that just are really good at binding books, making beautiful objects. And I really identified with the sort of latter side of that scale. Like I was not interested in books as high art, as sort of conceptual pieces. I was just interested in making something beautiful and tactile, because graphic design is not tactile for the most part. I studied typography and branding and all these kinds of things that are all very flat. They're all very digital. It's a very sort of alien world, and I love it. I've loved graphic design for as long as I can remember, basically. But I also love making things with my hands, and so when I was a kid, growing up, I would always tinker in the garage with like random scraps of wood or metal. I went through a phase where I like was prowling Craigslist for like free or extremely cheap bicycles, like $10 or less. And then I was just collecting them all and then like making weird Frankensteins of taking parts off of them and mixing them all together. I just love making stuff in my hands. And so when I got to college, bookbinding felt like kind of a middle ground where it was sort of in the art world. It was making something with my hands, but it also kind of was related a little bit, at least, to my sort of pursuits in graphic design. So that's why I decided to minor in it. But I was not interested in, frankly, most of the bodies of work of most book artists. A lot of it is this very conceptual stuff, or it's like there's kind of a prevalent sort of like elevated scrapbooky vibe to a lot of the book arts artists, at least, circa 2008 or whenever I was actually studying this. But I was looking through some books of portfolios of different book artists, and I found the work of this guy Jim Croft, and it's just he makes these just the most beautiful objects you've ever seen in your life. He binds books in the traditional medieval style. So prior to the printing press, books were extremely valuable objects, right? The pages were all vellum, they were all hand lettered, hand illuminated by monks in monasteries, and so they were like hugely valuable. And because of that, the binding was like a really important thing to do excellently so it could last forever because the book was so valuable. And so pre the printing press, books were just like immaculately made. And so he still makes books in this fashion. If you've seen probably books like this, or at least like, kind of fictionalizations of books like this, they all have wooden covers and they have big clasps on the open side. When it's shut, you can actually close the book and then like close it with these metal clasps. And the spines are all leather and they're sewn on cords. So there's like big ropes sort of holding the book together instead of just like little cloth tapes like we have on modern books. And that gives them those sort of like ridges on the spine. And yeah, he just makes books in the classic medieval style. His whole life is we could do like multiple podcasts just about his life and how he came to do this. But long story short, I really liked his work, but he was like kind of off the grid. I didn't know much about him, but I had a friend of mine who one summer went and took a papermaking internship with a papermaker in Portland, and then went to a book arts fair and met this guy at the book arts fair and told him, I have a friend that really loves your work. And he just said, tell that person to get in touch with me and they can do a work study with me. And so they came back with this guy's phone number, and he does have a phone, even though he's off the grid for the most part. And so I like called him and chatted on the phone a little bit and just, yeah, went out and did like a 5-week work study. I just like split firewood all day and like stacked it up for the winter in northern Idaho. And then by night he taught me how to make books, and it was awesome.
That sounds like an amazing experience. Do you still do this at all? Are you going to make War and Peace into like a machete or something?
No, I have not bound a book in many, many years. And it's not that I still like to make things in my hands. I just have other outlets, I guess, for that these days. But I would still love to do it. It's like, in college, it made a lot of sense because I had friends that always needed sketchbooks or whatever. And so if I bound books, for fun or as part of my classwork, I always had people to give them to. And now I would feel like I would just have a big stack of empty books with nothing to do with them if I were to start binding books again. But it's been a long time, but I think I think it would come back. I think it'd be like riding a bike. I think I could do it.
That sounds like an amazing story. I mean, that sounds great living 5 weeks like that in the middle of nowhere, just binding books and living off the land. That sounds great.
Yeah, it was wild. And I won't take, us on a huge diversion, but we could talk about that trip for, again, multiple hours. A lot of wild stuff happening up there. But yeah, that's one thing about me that I'm sure the vast majority of people listening do not know.
And who is your main in Super Smash Brothers Melee?
See, I don't really play Melee is the problem. Every time I say I'm excited about Super Smash Brothers, people like you are like, Melee? And I'm like, I played Melee as a kid. Now, I never owned a GameCube. I was a Sony guy. I had the PlayStation growing up. My friends had GameCubes, and so I remember specifically like, spending sleepovers just playing Melee all night, right? You always play on the temple, so you can always go to that little spot down there, and in Melee things are techable, I believe, to infinity. There's no such thing as an untechable, and so you can just live forever in that little pain cave. And I played, I think, Roy mostly back then. I really liked Roy and Marth. I know Roy is laughable by
Roy's our boy.
but Marth is one of the better characters. So I guess if I were to play Melee, I would probably teach myself Marth. But the truth is, I don't play Melee. I just play Ultimate, and I'm not very good at Ultimate either. I just really enjoy it.
I like Ultimate, but if you play a character that's past the Wii version, I won't know any of the moves of the character. So it's like cheating.
A lot of them are also not fun to play with or against. So it's probably a good spot to stop.
And yeah, so I'm really excited to talk to you today about the Neoclassical Cube. So I had a chance to play it about a month and a half ago at Vertex Philadelphia, and I had a great time. I built this insane black-white stacks crazy deck that would play balance and then hold priority, discard my whole hand to Putrid Imp, hold priority, sack all my lands to Zern Orb, and then have a curse scroll after top decking lands to kill my opponent. This cube was so fun. I had a blast. Every round, my opponents said they had fun, but I asked them, I said, did you have fun? And they said yes.
Bold question.
Yeah, I want to make sure that it's a zero-sum game, that I'm having more of the fun in that situation. Tell me about this cube.
Yeah, this is my take on an old school cube, which is a theme that we see a lot in the cube design world. I think there's, especially now, a lot of sort of renewed interest in nostalgic parts of the game. I mean, for better or worse, Magic is changing a lot and has changed a lot over the past few years. And so I think there's a lot of people for whom the sort of nostalgia pulls really strongly at them. And I would say I'm somewhat that. Like, I definitely played as a kid. I started playing Magic right around like 1998. And I only know this, by the way, because I've been able to go back retroactively because I played as a kid, then I stopped playing. And then when I got back into the game around like Return to Ravnica Origins ish era, I was able to go back and look through like Scryfall equivalent. I think at the time it was just Gatherer, and see at the point that I stopped recognizing the cards and be like, I clearly quit around this time. And I remember being in the Games Workshop in the Exton Mall in Exton, Pennsylvania, and seeing like the cardboard standees from like Masks block. So like I remember when Mercadia Mask was printed, I was playing actively, and then I quit right around 8th edition, pretty much, and then didn't pick it up again until, around Origins. So I do have some nostalgia for that era. I was pretty young. I was a kid, basically. I remember thinking that but didn't do very well at the Games Workshop at the Exton Mall when I was playing in the tournaments. I would oftentimes get, be one of the poorest placements. And looking back on it, I'm like, yeah, I was 9. Like, of course I wasn't doing well. I was 10 or 11. Like, I shouldn't have expected to do well. In my head, I felt like I was older. So I do have a little bit of nostalgia for the old days of Magic, but I would say like my real invested era of Magic is much more modern, much more, around, again, Origins. Like the sets I have like the most nostalgia for probably are like Kaladesh and Amonkhet, like that kind of sort of era is when I was playing the most limited. I was playing a ton of limited at that point, and that was when I was sort of most connected to the Magic like releases. And so yeah, this is my like attempt to like kind of call back to the early days of the game. And it's different in a couple ways. To me, what that means, the old days of the game, is not specifically an aesthetic restriction. Like I don't confine myself to only playing cards that, look old or were printed in the old border. It's really a gameplay restriction, like a vibes restriction, right? I think there are sort of really ways the game has changed very slowly over time that are actually hard to identify until you have the experience of playing a bunch of modern Magic and then just like dipping your toes into an old school cube. And I know you've played this cube too. I was inspired to build this at the very first CubeCon. I played the Old Border Foil Cube, Jeff Green's great Old Border environment that is a favorite of many because it's so beautiful. And I was very struck by just how different the games felt. Just put aside all of the like, sure, power creep is the thing, sure, complexity is the thing. It felt so different. The boards were so much simpler. It felt like the sort of limited options you had in a given turn just meant that you could actually consider the depth of all those options. Like the actual mentality in the game just felt so different to me. And that's what I sort of set out to pursue is like, all right, well, I like Old Border, but I would say Jeff is doing more close to like a kind of a power maxed Old Border frame foil restriction. So Jeff doesn't play any cards that are not printed in foil, except for Morphling, I think, weirdly, but that's neither here nor there. They have to be printed in foil, they have to be printed in Old Border, and Jeff is fine doing the sort of retroactive Old Border treatments in that cube. And frankly, having played it at that CubeCon, a lot of the best cards are just the new cards that have gotten the Old Border treatment retroactively because power creep is a thing. And so that cube is really more of, I think, an aesthetic feast. And I really wanted to focus specifically on just the vibes of old school Magic and trying to capture that and give myself plenty of flexibility with the other restrictions. No real hard restrictions other than the vibes of old school Magic.
Yeah, like you said, I've had a chance to play a couple Old Border cubes. I played at CubeCon, the Old Border Foil Cube that you said. It was beautiful, amazing. If you ever have a chance to go to CubeCon and it's featured, definitely play that cube. I played in the top 64. I scrubbed out with this blue-white sick deck that was just control. And like you said, a blue-white control deck when it's all Old Border or old cards feels very different.
So different.
And then I also got to play the Ancient Desert Cube at Cube for a Cause recently. And I totally get what you're saying. Some of the most powerful cards that I experienced were those retroactively old border changed cards from newer cards. For example, Soul Herder, one of my favorite cards ever, of course, was
Mhm.
extremely powerful in that cube. Same with Restoration Angel, Flicker Wisp, and they were a lot of fun, but they were very strong.
And actually, those cards I think are, for the most part, pretty good examples of one of the ways that card design has changed, not just in a strict power perspective, right? Because I mean, like old school Magic had broken cards, and this cube has broken cards in it, right? Like I play Mishra's Workshop. That card was a design mistake. Like that's a huge problem. That would never be printed now. That's more powerful than any, pick your favorite Oko, Minskambu, whatever. Like Mishra's Workshop is much more powerful, right? It's not a question of raw power level. It's a question of sort of the texture of that power. And one of the things that was the case with early Magic is that there's this sort of Baneslayer, Mold Drifter question that we hear talked about a lot in Magic and especially cube design. And then a card that kind of does both is often known as a Titan because of that sort of cycle of Titans, originally from M10, M12, I think M10, with the sort of monocolored Titans in each cycle. And what those cards were was both really powerful in terms of their abilities and also really powerful in terms of their body. Like their presence on the battlefield was substantial. And that's what you really just don't get in old school Magic, right? Like you'll get powerful set of abilities on a creature and it'll be like a 5 mana 2/2, right? Or something like that. Or you'll get a decent body and it has no abilities, right? It's just like, yep, here it is, big creature. Hope they don't have a removal spell because that's all you get. And, a card like Restoration Angel or, Soul Herder, cards that are enablers for these strategies. Their abilities are really relevant, but also Restoration Angel is just a 3/4 flyer for 4 mana with flash. That's a crazy rate. Soul Herder can grow to be enormous. I mean, it takes some time, but like it can become a huge threat. That's the kind of texture of cards we just don't get in old school Magic. And to me, the sort of defining feature of that is just that cards, for the most part, in old school Magic, kind of do one thing. They might have, multiple abilities or whatever, but they do one focused thing. And I think part of the sort of ethos of early days of Magic was like, well, it can't both have a thing that it does that's like ability based and then also just get to like dominate the battlefield. Like that's two things. Cards can't do two things. They got to do like one thing. So yeah, I think that that's part of sort of the texture of these old cards. So like, for example, I play some new cards like Kiki Jiki Mirror Breaker is probably one of the more contentious inclusions amongst the new border cards. There are no infinite combos with it, I should say, but even just as a value creature, like it is pretty powerful. But there's a perfect example. It's a 5 mana 2/2. Like you're playing Kiki Jiki because of its ability, and the fact that it's a 2/2 just makes it susceptible to removal. That's just a downside. If you could have an enchantment that just did this instead, you'd be like way happier. But Kiki Jiki does the one thing, right? It does one specific thing, and you got to like figure out a way to make it good.
Yeah. New designs, for example, one that I always think about is Corvold from the Brawl decks. It's a Jund creature. It has flying. When it enters, you sack, you draw a card. When it attacks, you sack, you draw a card. It gets bigger when you sack. Old border cards were not like that. It might have been a 5 mana 4/4 flying that when it enters, you sack something. In the old border, it wouldn't have gotten bigger. It wouldn't have drawn cards. It wouldn't have been a fully contained engine. Instead, you would have had to put together multiple pieces to create that engine. And I think it's really fun to have that creation that you have to put together between multiple cards compared to just a Ragavan that does everything.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's largely like the commanderification of the game, for better or worse. Again, like triggers are fun in Commander, right? And there's so many cards that were printed that says when you do X, do Y, and when you do Y, do Z, right? Like that kind of card templating is like very common these days. And honestly, it's because it's fundamentally pretty fun, right? Like building a sort of synergistic engine in any resource management game, Magic or any other resource management game, like that's where so much of the joy is. And so I think if you're not a full pure blood spike and all you care about is like playing the best meta deck for some tournament or whatever, then it makes sense if these kind of cards are really popular and they've printed a million of them, right? Like I totally get it. But I also agree with you that I think there is something more satisfying about building that synergistic engine when it is more difficult. And that's maybe an acquired taste thing, or that's maybe some nostalgia. But yeah, I find it more fun to have to combine my cards in like potentially novel, and honestly, I'll say even janky ways. This cube has like slowly over the years just kind of had some of its corners rounded off and maybe gotten a little too lean and mean. I think I'm actually planning to jank it up a little bit. I was talking to my play group about like just making it a little worse, like across the board. because I think part of the fun about this cube is, sure, you got some of the most powerful things in Magic you can do. You've got Mishra's Workshop, you've got Tolarian Academy, you've got, it's funny, all the good examples, they're just, like, you've got Force of Will, like, none of the creatures are that good, but you have all these other powerful things going, these powerful lands, these powerful spells, but also, like, you often just kill your opponent with an Arrogant Worm, right? Like, you do all of that, and then you, like, play a card that is just a 5-mana 4/4 trample, right? And then that's how you kill your opponent. And so that sort of jankiness is part of the appeal to me. I had a great deck in this cube recently that was an artifact themed deck. It had really, honestly, all the most broken artifact enablers, right? I had Workshop, I had all the best ramp, I had great ways to like just churn through my deck and draw cards. But in true fashion of this cube, right, my win condition was basically playing Karn, the like original Karn, the 5-mana 4/4 creature Karn that can animate your non-creature artifacts, and then just turn my mana rocks into creatures and attacking. And there was something so satisfying about getting to like time spiral and untap all my lands and like chain a bunch of spells together and then like, you know, frantic surge. The whole deck was also built around Mind Over Matter. I would get Mind Over Matter in play, and then I would like discard cards, untap my huge mana rocks, and then cast a Brain Geyser, like do all this like broken stuff, and at the end be like, and now I'll kill you with Thran Dynamo, because that's what I do. I'm not going to do this and cast Tendrils of Agony or whatever. I'm going to do this, I'm going to kill you with Thran Dynamo. And I think that's a big part of the fun of this particular cube.
Yeah, and we've already identified a couple of them, but some things that I think really exemplify how old Border Magic really felt was, and you've talked about some of them in your write-up of the Neoclassical Cube, cards were a lot less complex. Sure, there were cards that had a novel of text on them, but it generally boiled down to having one main effect. And so while there was a lot of synergy in the cube, there's less cross-pollination between archetypes that is less obvious because cards don't get a counter when they enter and then draw a card and sack something. And another thing is they were not afraid to make mean cards. I definitely experienced that when I played the cube. There are some very powerful cards, like some people might say breaking the social contract in Commander, for example, Armageddon,
Mm-hmm.
Balance, Aristocrats, Stacks effects. And like I said, I had that crazy Stacks deck at the event. And having extremely powerful enablers, but not as powerful payoffs. And I think that can almost be seen in many ways by this cube having a lot less creatures. Blue has 5 creatures in this cube. It's crazy to look at. It's very cool.
That's actually
And
not too uncommon for me specifically. Like, I'm actually gonna like poke at my other list real quick. People tell me all the time I need to put more blue creatures in my like primary cube, my Bun Magic cube, and I'm like, why? Blue has so many good spells. Why would I want to play creatures? I can get creatures in other colors. Yeah, right now I'm playing. It looks like I'm playing 12 now. I'm on a little more than previous iterations, but yeah, I'm playing 5 here. And something I think is actually really sort of strongly felt about old school Magic compared to modern Magic is that modern Magic is all about creatures, because they discovered pretty early on that like creature combat is maybe one of the most fundamentally genius parts of the game, right? There are so many genius parts of the game, but creature combat allows for very simple individual game pieces to lead to very nuanced, complex, strategic situations with very little sort of confusion or complexity, right? Like it leads to these like very interesting decisions very quickly. Just when you're like, I have a 3/3 and a 1/2, and you have a 3/2 and a 2/3 with flying, and my life total is this, your life total is that. That all of a sudden is just like a really interesting question of like, who's the beatdown? How's this race going on? How do I block? That kind of stuff. So I think they figured that out early on. But in the earliest days of Magic, Richard Garfield has said that like he didn't want creatures to be like the thing. Like he wanted some creature decks and some non-creature decks. And so this cube definitely supports creatureless decks, like, you know, largely creatureless or entirely creatureless decks that are playing to win with a big spell or playing to win with mill or something. And so that kind of speaks to my 5 creatures in blue, because there's plenty of blue decks that don't have any creatures in them at all.
yeah, and I think a lot of the archetypes in this cube really show having less of a focus on creatures. For example, having burn as an archetype, like straight burn to the face, is really cool and a lot of fun. Also, like storm or discard matters, or like I said, stacks before. None of these really fully rely around creatures compared to a lot of newer cubes that include a lot of newer cards. Archetypes might be aristocrats, where you need creatures, might be 1/1 counters or tokens, all around creatures. Very different focus when it comes to the archetypes.
Yeah, and if you asked me, like, that's probably a better game in some ways or in many ways. Like, if I had to choose, like, I'm only ever allowed to play modern Magic ever again or old school Magic, I'm probably choosing modern Magic, to be honest. I mean, I have a great play group here in Baltimore that I'm part of that I adore, and there's 30, 40 cubes in our play group, and the vast majority of them are modern Magic. So it's like we got plenty of that, and it's nice to have sort of a perspective into a different part of the game that just allows for different types of decks, right? I think compared to like your average, fair, modern cube, a lot of the sort of most important decisions you make in this cube are in the draft. And you can just end up drafting a deck that just has a terrible matchup against another deck, right? Like you might just be dead to Sulfur Vortex in a lot of matchups if you just don't have an answer for it. Like certain decks just can't beat it. And so if you don't know the sort of array of decks that you like need to play around or be prepared for, it can be pretty punishing. And I think a lot of cube designers would look at that and say like, well, I don't want to have any non-games, right? I don't want to have any like decks that can't beat other decks. And this is a context where I'm actually totally fine with that, right? Like I think that's part of the fun here is sometimes you draft a busted deck that just can't beat a certain card or vice versa. And you get to like take that into the next draft and like use that information to like hopefully draft a more versatile sort of less all-in deck the next time. But I don't mind those sort of swingier matchups in this particular environment.
And one question that I have for you is, are there any aspects of old border Magic you're purposely not including in this cube? For example, in Dominaria Remastered Draft, one part that I didn't like about it was there was a lot of creatures with land walk. So you couldn't even block any of their creatures. There was a lot of spells that couldn't target creatures of different colors. But I didn't really experience that in this cube when I played it. Are there any purposeful decisions you made to avoid feels bads or weird parts of old Magic that they don't include anymore?
Yeah, it's kind of a funny question because I'm definitely not just putting in all the old cards and seeing what happens. Like, I'm for sure avoiding stuff that I don't find to be particularly fun, right? There is no banding in this cube. There's very minimal regeneration, which is an effect I think is just awful to play with. It might just be on Masticore, and I'm not playing Masticore. You can't talk me out of that one. So I don't like unblockable creatures. I don't like sort of non-interactivity in general. And so, yeah, there's a lot of things I'm not including here that would definitely fit the sort of bill of old school Magic. I mean, another great example is like color hate. That is a thing that was very common in the old school days of Magic, where you just had cards that absolutely dunked on certain colors. And that, honestly, I actually think is way more interesting in constructed than it is in limited. When you have like a constructed meta, and you can say like, all right, well, green and red are the most powerful decks in the meta, so now we can print these cards that are color hate against green and red, and it opens up sideboard options and all that kind of stuff. Like, that's cool. I think sitting down to draft a cube and just having your opponent have a card that says destroy your deck on it if you happen to be playing these two colors is not particularly fun. It's kind of just a coin flip. So there's a ton of stuff I'm not including. And I think maybe people don't think that because they look at this list and they see stacks, they see land destruction, they see storm, they see, fireball, like some things that are like maybe the kinds of effects that a lot of people would choose not to include if they were choosing not to include things. But those are not the things that bother me, right? Like I'm here to play stacks or storm. I'm not here to play an unblockable creature with regenerate and just attack you 10 times and call it a night. So yeah, a lot of things I'm not including. This is definitely like a very curated perspective on the old school parts of the game that interest me.
Yeah, for example, in Dominaria Remastered Draft, when my opponent would play a Street Wraith and I'm playing black, and all my kill spells target non-black creatures, and I have swamps, so I can't block it. There was nothing worse than that experience in that draft.
Yeah, it's funny. In a couple of cases here, I've actually chosen new printings of cards that are essentially stand-ins for what were old cards that function almost identically, but just are way cleaner and don't have some of these like weird dumb edge cases. Like there's a lot of old school black fireballs, but you can only spend black mana on them for some reason. They're not too good if you can't spend black mana on them, but for some reason in the early days you had to spend only black mana on them. And that just means those don't work in the like big mana rock ramp deck that I have sort of devised here. So I just play Exsanguinate. Exsanguinate is like the same thing mechanically, it just doesn't have this sort of kind of strange old school restriction, and I think totally fits the vibes without being weird. Another great example is, a lot of these old school cubes will play the symmetrical anthems, right? The anthems that just pump all creatures of a certain color or whatever, regardless of who controls them, because that was a very common thing too in the early days of Magic. And I just play Honor of the Pure. So I'm just playing the one that says, wait, creatures you control get +1/+1, because I think that's actually just a cleaner sort of iteration of the same thing. So a lot of the places where I'm playing new cards are actually me just allowing myself to play the kind of, I think, improved, cleaned up version of an effect, even if it didn't actually make it into old school Magic.
Yeah. And another part of this cube that I really love is, and you've mentioned it many times on the Lucky Paper Radio podcast, is you have a very big drive toward promoting aesthetics in your cubes. So, for example, this cube has a focus on getting as many old beat up cards as you can. And I had so much fun with it when you had the sleeves that were the memory jar. Those were so cool. And you've also mentioned that the new cards that you put into the cube, while they're not aesthetics in the way of art, they're aesthetics in the way of feeling old school. Tell me about how aesthetics affect this cube.
If you had asked me, I wouldn't have said that like aesthetics are super important to me, but I think you're right. And I think what it comes down to for me is at the time that we are recording this, I think I have 34 cube lists in Cube Cobra, and most of them are half baked or less, like some dumb idea I had. They're hidden from public view. You can't even go look at it, but it's just like I had an idea, I threw some cards on a list. I might want to come back to it, or I started pursuing something and see where it went. Most of these cubes I never built in paper, and this one I did decide to build in paper. I'm actually working on sleeving up my 5th cube in paper, which feels so dumb. It's too many cubes to own, but this is where I find myself. Oftentimes what will get me over the edge of like having an idea that I'm, talking about on the internet with people or simulating draft stuff. And I should say too, like, I think we don't acknowledge this enough, but I think cube design is also just really fun if you just design lists and simulate drafts and talk about it with people, right? Like, I think it is just an interesting creative outlet, regardless of whether or not you assemble cards, sleeve them up, and actually play the cube, which might sound crazy to some people, but I do think it's totally valid. But oftentimes what gets me over the edge of just having a weird random list is some kind of like aesthetic hook that I feel like kind of ties the whole cube together into a cohesive package. In the Hunter Ornithopter cube, this was like numbering and altering the ornithopters, right? Like it was kind of a dumb idea, and people played it a little bit online and thought it was kind of interesting and gave me some good card suggestions, but I'm still not going to build it in paper. But then I was like, oh, but I could number the ornithopters if I did that. And then they would have like a personality. And then so these ideas of people getting to name an ornithopter and alter it if they like win a draft. And all of a sudden it's like, okay, that's the reason to build that cube, right? Like it's not that that particular cube design is like so interesting and, unique that it deserves to exist in paper so people can play it. It's like almost that entire cube is in service of like that weird aesthetic kind of project. And here, I had been noodling on a couple of old school Magic lists for a long time, especially I got reinvigorated by playing the old school foil cube, old world foil cube at CubeCon that first year. Ever since I saw the video that Ristic Studies did on that Gonti EDH deck, the video is called Dear Gonti Loves Sophie, which is just about this storied EDH deck that is owned by a guy that works as a card seller. And anytime a like totally trashed card came through his hands from some collection or something that could possibly go on this EDH deck, he put it in there. And it's like just comically destroyed cards, like cards missing half of the whole card, cards that are like completely scribbled on or whatever. But it's this like beautiful, weird artifact that has so much charm to it. Ever since seeing that, I was also like, man, I'd love to have an unsleeved cube, right? Like it'd be cool to have some kind of cube that embraced riffle shuffling and like kind of playing cards in this way in which they were intended when they were first printed that we just don't get to do anymore. And it wasn't until those two ideas kind of combined for me where it was like, oh, that kind of like the idea of an old school cube and an unsleeved cube, that could be one idea. And it kind of feels like it fits, right? These are cards that were printed largely in the days where card sleeves were not popular or didn't even exist. And it kind of tells a whole story collectively about how the cards came together. And as you mentioned, I try to find the most beat up card that I can still, plausibly somewhat pass off as like not totally marked if we were playing it unsleeved. I mean, the cards are marked, let's be clear. By any sort of judge's standard, the cards are 100% marked for sure. But my idea is like if they're all marked kind of, more or less the same amount, then it gets harder to remember like what's the card on top of your deck based on sort of the weird pattern of wear on the back of it. But I'm trying to get the most broken, sort of messed up versions I can. And I'm especially into versions of cards that were clearly valued very differently by people at the time. I remember being a kid and like scribbling on my cards or making a dumb little proxy out of something. And one of the first cards I picked up for this cube that got me really excited about it was my copy of Deranged Hermit, which somebody has scrawled in ballpoint pen over the art, "I kill you, die, die, die." And it clearly has the vibe of somebody like it's not like an alter. Like this person was not trying to make the card more beautiful. I don't know the story behind it. It clearly has the vibe of somebody that like lost to this card too many times because their sibling was playing it against them and they like just defaced it when they had a chance because they hate this card so much. They hate playing against it. That kind of naive alteration is what gets me really excited. I had a listener of the show came up to me at Steel City Cube in Pittsburgh and gave me a lotus petal. And this is another one of my favorite altars in the cube now. And the lotus petal has a big blacked out bar of Sharpie over top of the art, not the entire art, just like, you know, the middle of it is like all Sharpied. And if you look really closely, you can see through the Sharpie that someone was Sharpieing out that they had at some point written in ballpoint pen Zurin orb on their lotus petal. I'm sure at some point somebody was like making a proxy of a Zurin orb out of a lotus petal, and then at some point later on they were like, oh, actually the lotus petal is worth more than the Zurin orb. Let's just cross out that Zurin orb. This is back to being a lotus petal. And like that kind of stuff, you just like, I feel like you can't fake it, and it is so charming to me, and it speaks to like that's the kind of relationship to the game that I'm nostalgic for. The relationship where you're just like, this is just a game. We're just playing this. It's just fun. These are just pieces of paper. It's not that serious. And so those are the kind of cards I really love to collect for this cube. And I got to get around at some point to scanning them and putting them up on Cube Cobra. It's hard because I don't know at what point it's worth scanning versus it just being worn. I got to figure it out. But there's definitely a lot of cards I'm really fond of in this cube that are altered in weird ways.
I totally understand that. I've been playing since I was a kid also. I think since third grade is when I started. I have so many cards and when I was a kid, just in binders and boxes, and I like to look through them sometimes. And one of my favorite cards I have is this old white border planes. And when I was a kid, I must have drawn like this stick figure with this big goofy smile right on the art and like a weird hat. And every time I look at that card, it just makes me feel great. So I totally get where you're coming from.
Some of them are so weird. My basics are also funky in that cube, and I've had people give me old border basics over the years that have weirdly altered. And one of them is like a revised planes that someone just took a pencil and erased the mana symbol out of the text box. I don't know why. It's clearly marked with an eraser, like they, erased just the planes symbol out of the text box. So it just says to mana pool, basically, add, an empty space to mana pool. Very strange. But yeah, those are the kinds of altars that I love for this cube and am seeking more of. I tend to like trawl various damaged and heavily played Facebook groups and like Discord servers to try and find cards for this cube. I also just kind of check eBay pretty regularly for cards that I'm particularly in love with and know are going to be in the cube for a long time to find altered versions. I have a curse scroll in this cube that is signed by the artist and also signed by Richard Garfield. And I don't love that one as much because that's like a thing that people value, right? Like they clearly valued the card enough to like get it signed. And I've had multiple people get mad at me that I'm playing this card unsleeved because it's like a valuable thing. And I'm like, you don't understand the point of this cube if you are mad at me for doing this. But if anybody out there has a naively altered curse scroll, more in the vein of I kill you, die, 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 or Zurin Orb Sharpied out, it's got to be legit, and I'll be able to tell. You can't fake it. If anybody has one and wants to trade it for the curse scroll signed by Richard Garfield and the artist, let me know. I'll make that trade if you got one.
Yes, definitely leave a comment or reach out to Andy on Discord or online if you happen to be looking through the list of the Neoclassical Cube and you say, "Oh my gosh, I have a destroyed version of that I played on the pavement in second grade in 1995 of a card in the cube." I'm sure you would love to hear about it.
Yeah, I've got like my mystical tutor has a sticker of Bart Simpson that fits perfectly over the face of the woman in the mystical tutor art. I don't know the story behind that. That's very weird. Honestly, I think the one that is the most mysterious is my copy of Force of Will, which I got from one of these like heavily played and damaged Facebook groups. And the person that sold it to me said they didn't know the story behind it either. And I don't know how the provenance of this card, but it says on the card in Sharpie pretty boldly 100% fully codified. And the letters of Cody are kind of weird and it's clear like they've been like altered at some point and like kind of like transformed into other letters. And what I think happened, here's my theory. My theory is that at some point somebody looking at this original Therese Nielsen art, No Turf Song Rule Turf, saw the sort of muscle-bound mage in the art and wrote 100% fully roidified, like steroids, and then somebody bought it for their Cody EDH deck and then just changed roidified to codified by like adding a couple strokes here and there and like combining letters. That's the best explanation I can come up with for how that possibly came to be, but I love how weird and mysterious it is.
Yes, I love that you've gotten these stories from these cards and you've thought through the process of how they came to be. It's amazing. And another question that I have for you is pertaining to the gameplay of this cube. I would say, especially like when I was playing the old border foil cube at CubeCon, to be honest, when I got into the top 64, I said, "Ah, please don't be that cube. Please don't be that cube." Because I had never played an old border cube before and I had no idea what I was doing. I knew that I would do poorly, and I did. What are some aspects of this cube or advice that you would give to players that haven't played an old border cube before that when you play it, look out for this or don't make these mistakes?
Well, I'm famously reticent to like actually give advice to actual drafters because of a couple reasons. One, I'm not that good of a player, and so like I don't want anything I say to like change the decisions of an otherwise better player. Like I don't want to like pollute anybody's perspective of a cube. The bigger reason is like as the cube designer, I don't want to like have any influence over the like experiment of having somebody else play it. But there is one thing I do literally tell drafters when I sit down to play this cube every time, and I say if you've never played an old school cube, you should just know that Disenchant and Naturalize are main deckable in this environment. That is the one thing I will actually say, because if you're used to Modern Magic, where creatures are the only thing that really matters, right? Like there's other stuff going on, but like the one constant you can rely on are that in Modern Magic, creatures are going to matter to some degree, pretty much. If you're used to that, you might think, oh, Disenchant's a sideboard card. Maybe they have a broken artifact or enchantment I bring it in for, but otherwise I don't want that main deck. And here there's just a big density of artifacts and enchantments, but I think more importantly, a lot of the most powerful cards are artifacts or enchantments, because creatures, again, pound for pound, not the best at this time of Magic. But if your opponent plays, an opposition or Mind Over Matter or Bulbous Citadel, admittedly, that one's not actually an old school card, but Channel Plus Future Sight, that's basically old school. Sulfuric Vortex is a great example. Any of the weird stacks artifacts, you're going to want a disenchant for it. So that is the one piece of advice I do actually give people in the spirit of the sort of conversation, to not just say, I will refuse to tell anybody anything. I think the things to keep in mind when you're going into this cube are you will get to do what would otherwise be like maybe a more ambitious or sort of edge case interaction in this cube a lot, because you're not under much of a clock because the creatures aren't that great. There's a decent amount of card draw. Games are going to go long in terms of turns often, though not necessarily long in terms of like time on the clock. And if you have Mind Over Matter plus Arcanus, the Omnipotent, you can genuinely play Mind Over Matter and wait until you get to the point in the game where you can have enough mana to play Arcanus and hold up the 4 mana to put it back in your hand to make sure it survives the turn cycle to then draw your whole deck, right? Like thinking of combining 2 6-mana cards in like a modern sort of contemporary Magic environment to that in that weird way, you would feel like, well, that's never going to happen. That's like magical Christmas land stuff. And I think the nature of old school Magic, at least in this cube as I've curated it, is you get to do the sort of edge case interaction things more often. So you should be drafting with those combinations and interactions in mind, because they are going to matter for the most part. And you should also plan for your opponent to be doing the same, which means that your spot removal, either for creatures or artifacts or enchantments, is going to matter too, because you can oftentimes disrupt those particular combinations. Like it ends up being a synergistic environment, but not in the way that anybody in 2025 would otherwise think of a synergy cube. When you think of synergy cube in Modern Magic, you think of give me all the cards that say when I do X, do Y, right? And then in each color combination, I pick one theme. It's artifacts or it's spells matter or it's whatever, and all the cards care about that one thing, and it's kind of a snowballing engine. And this is not that. This is like, do you get to combine Kiki Jiki Mirror Breaker and Flame Tongue Kavu? Do you get to combine Parallax Wave and Auramancer? Do you get to combine a bunch of stacks cards with your Curse Scroll, right? Or your Grindstone, just like some way that will eventually win the game if you put a couple mana into it every turn, but asks very little of you, right? Those are the kinds of interactions that end up mattering here. And it does totally change the way that you draft and play, in my experience.
100%. When you said Mind Over Matter and Arcanus, it brought me back to my second commander deck that I ever built, my Nekusar deck, that one of the main win cons was Mind Over Matter plus Temple Bell, that I would just keep making everyone draw a card over and over again and lose life. So, oh, so good.
I didn't have it in the Nist initially because I was like, it's 6 mana, it has no immediate impact. You have to then put more resources into it to do something. And all you get to do is untap or tap something for a whole card. Like, it feels like at every point along the way, the card is terribly costed, right? You're like, why am I paying 6 mana for an enchantment that doesn't affect the board? And then I'm paying a whole card to just tap or untap something. I think I get to do for free every turn. Like, how could this ever make any sense? And Without fail, anytime this card comes down, like just messed up stuff, it happens almost immediately. Like it's turns, any card into Black Lotus if you have a mana rock. It turns any card into Ancestral Recall if you have an Arcanist. You can just tap your opponent's big threat down every turn if you need to like buy you time. Like it gums everything up in this like really, really interesting way. And it's a perfect example of the kind of old school cards that I love here, because this card is so simple. Choose and discard a card, tap or untap target artifact, creature, or land. End of text, right? And yet, I would say this card is way more complicated or complex. I forget the difference. It's either complex or complicated, but it's not the other one. It's simple, as a game piece, but I would imagine that a like less enfranchised player would struggle way more to play with this card successfully than they would to play with Minsk and Boo, or some card that takes the initiative and that whole sort of a dungeon comes into play. Like those cards are hard for new players too, but for a very different reason. Like cards like Mind Over Matter or like Humility is another great example. Like Humility, very simple card that leads to the most judge calls of any card maybe ever, right? Like the number of weird game states that come up because of Humility. It's like the card is simple, but it's also incredibly complicated. And that kind of unfolding complexity is one of my favorite things about this cube. It allows you to, for the players that care, that want to do the weird interactions with Humility and Mind Over Matter, it's there for them. And for players that are less enfranchised, they're like, I'm not taking this weird dumb 6-mana enchantment. I'm taking goblins and I'm going to attack you, and I'll make you come up with something weird.
Yeah, I definitely experienced that when I play old border cubes, that you see something like upheaval in the pack and you say, what do I do with this card? The words are so simple on it. Return all permanents to the owner's hands. But then what do you do with this card? But it's so fun. And I think that's some of the beauty of old border magic.
Yeah, for sure. These cards that look kind of really unsuspecting at first, and then once you become more enfranchised, you're like, oh no, actually, this is totally messed up. Like Mind Over Matter is not okay, and Upheaval is for sure not okay, even though it's completely symmetrical and a 6-mana thing that just resets the game is broken. And learning that and sort of figuring out how and why is definitely feels like an important like almost coming of age in old school Magic, or in like the early days of the game.
Definitely. And Andy, let's jump into a pack one, pick one from the cube here. I'm excited to get your perspective on this pack. We've already talked about a few cards in here. So we have Kiki Jiki Mirror Breaker, which is one of the most iconic, I would say, cube cards of all time,
I think so.
especially for combo, which really isn't in this cube, but it's still just a great value card. I love a value Kiki. Then we have Arc Lightning, which is just a burn spell, but you can divide it among things if you want to. Overgrowth, Enchantment Land Ramp. Negate, a card that I mentioned before we started recording. I'm so surprised this was never an old border. It feels so perfect to me. Like Duress was an old border card, and Negate would be the old border version of it, but
A
no.
lot of the new cards that I run kind of fall into the category of like that wasn't printed in Old Border, like, or like could totally have been and just didn't happen to be, right? Like I think Burst Lighting is another great example. Like Kicker is an old school mechanic. Burn spells have only gotten less efficient over time, right? They were most efficient in the early days of Magic, so it's not like it's too efficient to print in old school. So it's just like, yeah, that could have been old school. It just didn't happen to be. And Negate certainly fits that description for me too.
Absolutely. And then we have Summer Bloom, banned in Modern, way too good in Amulet Titan. One and a green, you may play up to 3 additional lands this turn. Fiery Temper, which is a burn spell with Madness. Selesnya Sanctuary, bounce lands. I love bounce lands in Cube. And there is Wasteland in here, so be careful. But no Strip Mine, so that's important. No Strip Mine, but Wasteland. Then we have Karn, Silver Golem. As you mentioned, it can turn your non-creature artifacts into artifact creatures, and it also gets pretty big. Elves of Deep Shadow, which is a mana dork that deals damage to you but adds black. Terravor, which is a card that I had to take out of my Momir cube because one green green for an XX equal number of lands in your grave. If everyone's discarding lands to cast all their spells, it was like a 10-10 on turn 4. It was way too good. But it's an XX that has power and toughness equal to lands in all graveyards and trample.
It's important on that one.
Yes. Then we have Enlightened Tutor. Search for an artifact or enchantment, put it on a top, iconic card. Grindstone, which there's no Painter's Servant in this queue, but still a very powerful card,
You're
which,
just playing Grindstone like Curse Scroll here. You are just playing it if you can get your opponent like completely locked out of the game and dejected, you can just eventually kill them with Grindstone.
yeah, I think that that's also such a fun part of this cube is there are these cards that are combo cards like Kiki or Grindstone, but in here they're just good cards in their own, how they were meant to be. Then we have Deserted Temple, which is a land that can untap other lands. So do some really strong stuff with some lands in this cube, like you said, guys, Cradle, Tolarian. Then we have Living Death, such a fun card, complicated card, but so fun that lets you switch the cards in the grave and in play. And then finally, Metalworker, which is a card that I've been testing in my Rakdos cube because I love that card. Not as much in Vintage Cube anymore, but it's so fun, the things that it can do. What do you think of this pack?
Did you curate this pack at all, or is just the first one you just happened to generate?
I switched like twice, and then I saw this one. I was like, this is really cool.
I think it's a great pack because there's no like boring, obvious answer. Like fetch lands are such high picks, they're great. There's also a lot of power outliers here in this cube, and so there's a certain number of cards that it's hard to imagine ever passing if you open them. So we don't have any of those though, I would say. None of these cards are like huge power outliers, but there's quite a few very strong cards that in the right deck could be one of your best cards if built around properly. Cards like Karn, Living Death, Kiki Jiki, like honestly, even Summer Bloom, it's a card that I think it gets overlooked a little bit here, but I do play the full cycle of bounce lands, and Fast Bond is a deck here. And this is by far the best sort of redundancy for Fast Bond. It is so much better than Exploration, which I also play. But when you're actually comboing off and you draw a bunch of cards with Time Spiral, and then you get to play Summer Bloom, like it feels so good. So those are some of the cards that I think could be like the best card in your deck in the right deck. If I'm just playing to win, the deck that I think is the strongest in this cube relative to how excited people are to draft it is just mono red. And that's some combination of burn or like goblin sort of lightly themed aggro. And if that's the case, I'm probably just taking Fiery Temper or Arc Lightning. And it's kind of a toss up between them, honestly. Probably Arc Lightning, I guess. I don't think you're going to wheel either of them, but you could wheel Kiki Jiki. You're not going to wheel Kiki Jiki. I don't know what you wheel for that deck in this pack, but I do think that you can just kind of sit down and force mono red if you really want to win, and it's a pretty strong strategy. But I personally don't play this cube to force mono red. That's not what I'm here for. So for me, I'm probably going to take Kiki Jiki here, and it is a build around, right? Like this card is a build around on the same sort of scale as Karn Silver Golem or Metalworker or Summer Bloom. Like you have to have a deck that makes sense for Kiki Jiki, and the average, red creature deck, you're not going to be doing much all that great, right? Like maybe Flametongue Kavu or Avalanche Riders are like some of the best things you can do. Siege Gang Commander actually comes up pretty often in the Goblin deck. Those are some of the best things you can actually do within red, but for the most part, like you have to look to other colors to get really messed up stuff like Deranged Hermit if you want to be like going absolutely dummy, or Symbiotic Worm is really kind of messed up. Karmic Guide is pretty cool with Kiki Jiki, and yeah, that's probably what I'm going to take just because it's fun, and I haven't actually gotten to play it in this cube all that many times, maybe like 3 or 4 times ever, and so I think that's my pick, but I think there's a lot of defensible picks here. What are you interested in?
There's a few cards. You actually mentioned it. I was about to say Kiki Jiki, copy your Karmic Guide, sack the Kiki to Goblin Bombardment, infinite damage in your opponent's face. Now that's hype. And I also
Is
love
that I
Blink.
guess there's no infinites with Kiki Jiki? There's no 2-card infinites, but if you do combine that and Goblin Bombardment to 3 cards, you can get there. You can make a combo happen.
Yeah. Another card is Living Death. That's just such a fun card. You play Self Mill, you get a bunch of cards in the grave and Buried Alive, and then you go crazy. You bring back your Kiki combo, and then you're in shape. But also Elves of Deep Shadow is great. I mean, it's just a 1-mana dork. It's really strong, always. So I think I'm on probably Living Death because it's just such a powerful and unique card. But those other cards I'm really tempted to take.
Yeah, I think Living Death is totally defensible, and it can be a lot of different things, right? Like I've seen control decks kind of just play it as like a board wipe in a pinch. Like if I need to, this is a board wipe that works as long as I haven't removed much of my opponent's other stuff this game so far. Or you can build around it in the like full-on dedicated reanimator way, or you can build around it in like a cool kind of combo toolbox way. If you do have your Entombs and your Buried Alives, you can just go get whatever creatures combine in a way that sort of matters for your deck.
But I'd also be tempted to take Enlightened Tutor and try and get that crazy deck that I was doing before with Curse Scroll and the stacks pieces.
Creatures are best up. So yeah.
And Andy, it's been amazing having you on the show. I would love to have you on again in the future. Anything you'd like to say before we wrap up?
Yeah, don't put strip mine in cubes, people. I have had strip mine in 4 cubes at some point, and every time it ends up getting cut because it's a problem. I just don't think that card belongs in cubes. If you're giving me a soapbox, I'm just gonna say that like it was in this cube for a little while, and I actually have a really awesome strip mine that somebody drew a sandcastle on that I love, and I wish I could play, but it is not okay. The card is not okay. There's some, way to play around Wasteland, but just your opponent mulliganed to a one less land in their hand than they thought is just so devastating. It was too good for the Micro Cube. It was way too good for the Bun Magic Cube. It's too good for the Neoclassical Cube. Just don't do it. That's what I'm going to say.
I've had that in multiple cubes. I had it in Peasant Cube. Nope, had to come out. I had it in Bant Cube. Oh, way too good. Had to come out. Right now, I have it in Rakdos Cube, and I think it feels okay. I mean, there's not many really ways to bring it back or do anything with it. There's a lot of utility lands, but it's a pretty mean cube. There's a lot of mean stuff going on. So I
Maybe you've
might
got
have
the
found
one,
a sweet spot.
got the one cube that Strip Mine belongs in, but I'm still skeptical. I'll have to play it to find out.
Yes. And before we wrap up, I forgot to say it earlier. If you happen to be in the Games IRL, Avon, Connecticut area, definitely come check out my game store that I go to every week. We play Cube there every week. And everyone, please like, subscribe, follow, check out Lucky Paper Radio. Like I mentioned before on previous episode with Anthony, if you somehow have not heard about Lucky Paper Radio and are listening to my show, I don't know how that would have happened, but definitely check out Lucky Paper Radio. And thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was great. I'm very grateful to get a chance to talk about this cube, which is actually one of the cubes I'm asked about the least. People are very interested to talk about my Bun Magic Cube because it's like, the zeitgeist, everyone building sort of power max eternal cubes. And right now, people are excited about 100 Ornithopters, and I'm kind of over talking about it, to be honest, but people keep asking me questions about it. So I'm really excited that I got to talk about this cube, which I don't get to talk about as much.
Yeah, I had a great time, and we'll get you on to talk about something else in the future.
Anytime.